Thank you for joining us. This is live with the Miami Community News, and today is November 22nd, 2022. This day will live in infamy, this date. Tell us where you were on November 22nd, 1963, David Pearson.
Started out, I was sitting at my desk at the Peace Corps where I was information officer. And
In Washington.
in Washington, yes. And all of a sudden the AP machine, wire machine started ringing, bells started ringing, and 5 bells a flash. You never hear that, like Pearl Harbor Day or something like that. 5 bells went off. My secretary came running in and said, "The president's been shot." Oh my God, perhaps fatally. I said, "Oh my God." We were just sitting there stunned. We didn't know. A few minutes later, I get a phone call from Sergeant Shriver, who was President Kennedy's brother-in-law and head of the Peace Corps. He says, "Dave, all the press guys are gone somewhere else. There's nobody here to handle the press. Mrs. Kennedy asked me to come over to the White House and handle the arrangements for the weekend."
So at this point, you know the president's been shot. You got a call verifying that he's been shot.
Yes.
At that point, was he pronounced dead yet at that point?
At that point, Shriver asked me to come over to the White House and help him with the press while the arrangements were being made for the weekend for the funeral. So I ran across Lafayette Square. Our office was across Lafayette Square from the White House. Ran across Lafayette Square, ran to the White House, and started working immediately, writing press releases about what was going to happen this weekend. There were arrangements for the funeral, arrangements for lying in state, all these different things that were going to happen.
And you were a young man, quite a young man.
Yes, I was young, yeah.
So what was it like for you emotionally when you got the 5 rings and then the secretary and then the phone call? What was it like for you spiritually?
It was like being in a dream. As I was running across the park, it hit me that the President Kennedy, whom we all, I want to say worship, but we were all very, very fond of him, was dead, was killed. I couldn't believe it. And that I was going to be in the White House somehow. I had never been inside the White House prior to that time. And so it was like being in a dream. That's
so there, you run over, you go into the White House. And so you were met there by Shriver, who said, "We need to get going," or how did that happen?
Actually, I got in there, and the first person I saw was Ted Sorensen, who was President Kennedy's speechwriter. And he was asking me if I had a quarter for a cigarette machine. He was out sleepwalking in hell. He was completely out of his mind. And then Shriver saw me and said, "Come over here, sit down here." And so I sat there and heard all the things that were going on about the arrangements being made for the funeral.
And so that was about what time, more or less? Do you remember?
What time?
What time of the day?
It happened. I found out about the shooting about 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. In fact, my wife and I were planning on going to see a movie that night, and it was Friday night. And by the time I got over to the White House and got in there, it was like 4 o'clock.
Was the place pretty frantic? And were people?
No, it wasn't frantic. There weren't that many people in there. All the people who were the staff of Kennedy were not there, were gone. Where, I don't know. People that were in there were people that Shriver had asked to come in. For example, the Peace Corps psychiatrist, Joseph English, was there. The Secretary of State for Protocol, Andrew Biddle-Duke, had been called over.
So tell us about that. When he came in,
he came in. He came in with a big book, and he put it down on the table, and he said, "This is the protocol book for the death of a president. And he opened the book up, and the first thing you saw in the book was a Harper's Weekly page of Lincoln lying in state after he had been assassinated. So we basically were using the protocols from what they used for President Lincoln for President Kennedy.
So that's such a mind-bending experience. It
Yes.
must have been like, wow, is this really happening?
It was so incredible that I really wasn't thinking about myself, about how I felt about it. I was just doing it. You know what I mean?
So here it is,
Just
years
doing
later,
it.
decades later, and you're still passionate about it, still emotionally involved in it, right? Because what a tragic day for the country and perhaps the world, and for
Yeah.
everybody that was affected by that. So there you were. You helped prepare the process as far as the press
Yeah.
releases. I think we have a picture of the funeral. Was that at the White House?
Yes.
Okay, can we show that picture, Alex?
Yeah. That looks like the East Room. It looks like when they brought in the body in the casket, they had a flag draped over it. There were an honor guard of Marines. These look like sailors.
And you have a clear recollection of this.
Yes. Let me tell you a little bit about
Thank you, Alex.
leading up to the East Room, to that picture. Shriver said, we need to go to the East Room and get it ready because that's where the body is going to lie in state. So we were walking down the hall from the office where we were to the East Room, and we passed by the room where Kennedy's office was. And there was a television set in there, and for some reason it was on. It was turned on. We stopped and looked in the door, and it was a video of Kennedy's famous Berlin speech that he had made in Berlin, where he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," and the crowd went crazy. And it was such a moving moment. I looked at Shriver, and there was a tear on his face, and he started to talk, and he almost cried. So he just went like that and walked along. We went into the East Room, and then as we were standing there waiting, we heard marching steps, Marine Guard bringing in the casket about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was terrifying. It was just terrifying. There wasn't a sound.
At that point, you've been there.
Been there
15
ever
hours.
since 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, all right.
Maybe 3 o'clock. I've been there 15 hours just doing stuff, and writing releases and stuff. Well, when they came in, they set the body, the casket up on the catafalque. The catafalque is the thing that holds the casket. That was the same catafalque that they used for Abraham Lincoln. Same one.
So
They had found it in the archives and brought it over from the archives.
So here you are, young age, watching now. You heard that he was shot. People were crying. Now they bring in the body. What was that like for you when you look and say, "There's President Kennedy dead"?
Again, it just seemed unreal. It did not seem like it was really happening. I couldn't grasp it. I couldn't get my head around it, as they say, So we were all, those of us who were working in there were standing back up against the wall. It was very dark in the East Room, except for the chandeliers that were on. We were standing against the wall, trying to disappear, really. And then a priest came in, and an altar boy. And the priest had a little bottle of holy water. And he walked up to the casket and put some holy water in the casket. And the little boy, the priest lit the candle holder, the thing that you light the candle with. And the little boy was lighting the 4 candles at the edges of the casket. The last one, he couldn't quite get it I knew as a former altar boy, I knew what happened is that the cap had come down over the wick, and so he couldn't get the flame into the wick because it was under. Now, I knew that, but I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Finally, somehow it caught, and all four of the. At that point, Jackie Kennedy came in the room, came down the stairs and into the room, and Bobby Kennedy was on her holding up her right arm, and McNamara, of all people, the Secretary of State, was holding up her left arm, and Secretary of Defense, excuse me, and they came in with her holding her up. She came up to the casket, and she knelt down, and they were standing up behind her. And she picked up the edge of the flag over the casket and kissed the flag and dropped it. And the priest then said a few words in Latin, blessed the casket. And then it was over, and she started to get up. And as she started to get up, she collapsed. She fell down, and the two guys ran over. Bobby and McNamara ran over and grabbed her arm, and she lay there. She knelt there with her head up against the edge of the casket. It reminded me, and this is really crazy. It's the things that go through your head. It reminded me of when I had seen a young girl putting her head up against the flank of her horse at a horse show. She loved the horse so much. She had her head. It reminded me, for some reason, that crazy things that go through your mind at times like that, and how deeply she felt. She started to sob, tried to get up. She started sobbing, and so they both picked her up like this. And as they started out, I noticed that her dress, she had on that pink nubby suit, and there were these chocolate-looking stains all over the front where his head had lain. There was the blood stains were still. She hadn't changed clothes. She had the same suit on that she'd had in the car when he was killed. And so they walked out, got her.
Your description is very vivid and very real. It's almost as though it happened yesterday for you. That's because you're so involved with that. So what impact has that had on you, that week or two, and now over many, many decades? How do you think that affected you?
It's had several effects on me, not necessarily all in a line. There were very, very disparate things that happened. One thing that happened here locally in Miami happened because of this article in the paper, and the Herald ran a big article, and
so this is one they published in. This is a reprint.
Yes, they keep reprinting it every few years.
2010,
yes,
right? And there's a big story back there on the front there.
Yeah. And so Larry King was a radio commentator on WIOD at the time. He was a small time.
Let me ask you, is that the pink dress?
Yes, that's the dress.
This is the dress right here that he's making
That's
reference
the
to.
suit. It's a suit, actually. It was a pink suit. Anyway, Larry King was on a houseboat, broadcasting from a houseboat across in the Indian Creek, WIOD, and he had me on. He saw the story. He had me on. He interviewed me twice, 2 different times. So somehow my name got around Miami, and I developed, because of this little kind of like faux reputation that I was somehow a Kennedy person or connected with high things, way beyond my pay grade, I mean, way past where I was, just because of the fact that I had been there. So one day I got a call from Bob Graham, who was at that point a state senator, saying, I saw a story in the paper about the Kennedys thing and so forth and so on. I wonder if you'd be willing to come and talk to me. I'm thinking about running for governor. And, I mean, I had absolutely no experience in politics. There's no reason why he should have called me except for the fact of that.
So, how long had you been in Washington before this assassination, and when did you leave Washington?
I went to Washington in 1962, and this happened in November of 1963. Had been there for a year and a half.
And
then after that, I said, no, I didn't leave. President Lyndon Johnson became president, and he asked everybody to stay in place. He asked everybody in the government, please don't leave. A lot of people left. Bill Moyers, who had been my boss at the Peace Corps, had gone to the White House with Johnson. He asked me to stay. Shriver asked me to stay and help him with the poverty program, which he was taking over. But the governor of Florida prior to that time had been a man named Leroy Collins.
Sure.
Leroy Collins, I had met him a couple of months before. He called me up and said, listen, I'm going to be appointed by President Johnson to head up the civil rights program of the government. Would you come and help me? I don't know a lot of people in the government. So I left the Peace Corps and went to work for Leroy Collins.
What year was that?
1964.
And then, so you left Peace Corps, you went to work for Leroy Collins.
In 1964.
Right? You know, now I remember why I liked you, because of the things you've done with your life. So if you wonder why, that's some of the reasons there. It's 1964, you work with trying to make things better for the country, right? So 64, you're there for how long working with
a year?
A year. And then you made your way down to...
Then I spent a year in Atlanta learning how to run a PR business and handle the Atlanta Braves. That was one of my great clients, Hank Aaron. And then I came to Miami and started my PR firm in South Miami. In fact, right next to the First National Bank of South Miami
right down the street from
on
there.
Sunset Drive.
And
I've been there ever since.
Why move to Miami? What caused you to come here with all the other places?
I knew a guy who was handling Lawrence Rockefeller's resorts in the Caribbean. And he said to me, I was in Atlanta, he said, if you go to Miami and start your own firm, we'll hire you to do the PR for all of Rockefeller's resorts in the Caribbean. So I said to my wife, how about let's take the kids and move back to Miami, which is where I was from.
So that was in what year, more or less?
1966.
I was just a little kid then, Chris. So here you've been. Your son Chris is here, right? So,
right.
And our studio audience right over there.
Yes.
Right. And so you said, I'm in the PR business.
Right.
And we sort of met a little bit after that.
No, you know where you met me?
No, I don't remember.
We were both working out in the gym, the community gym in South Miami, in that boot camp program.
Yeah. And you just to remind you, so we have hanging on our wall a story that we did in 1986, quoting you about the Bakery Center, and that so you wrote stories that we appeared. Your mother wrote a story.
That's right.
About the Caribbean, right?
That's
and
right.
now your son is writing stories.
That's right.
It is a generational thing right here.
That's
Three
right.
generations, right?
That's
It's
right.
never been done before. Now, if I could get my son to write, all right, then we could be on some equal footing. I don't know if that's going to happen. So here you are. You're going along, in the PR business, and you had quite the reputation. But you did mention about now Bob Graham, who was running for Senate, right? At that point, he was running for governor.
He ran for governor. I handled the PR for him down here, and then when he ran for the Senate, I also did, and I ran several statewide campaigns, like one conservation program called Save It Florida, where we were trying to save energy, and one called Save the Everglades, one called Save Our Shoreline.
And that's more or less what year was that when you were working on that?
Yeah.
What year more or less was that?
75, 77.
So here we are now, like many years later, and it's finally improving. But it takes the people that start it and do that long before it becomes popular. So you were working on things way ahead.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And by the way, Miami-Dade County has an all electric garbage truck
No
that
kidding.
gets refueled, charged up at the plant, all right, where the garbage is incinerated and turned into electricity.
Oh, how
so,
great.
So at night they plug that big garbage truck in there, all right.
How
so
great.
so that all started 50 years ago, 40 years ago, where
Yep.
these things started to move forward.
Yep.
So you wrote a book. Tell us about the book, David.
Yes, this book.
Where are we? Where's the camera here? Oh, that one right there. Okay. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the title of it is JFK and Bobby, and Arnie and Jack. The reason why it says Arnie and Jack is because when I came to Miami, the specialty that I fell into was golf courses and resorts and resort communities. Like in Miami, I handled Fisher Island, I handled Deering Bay, I handled the Boca Raton Hotel.
We didn't work out a deal. We could move into one of those over there.
So as a result, I got to meet a lot of people like Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, and
I guess that's who that is right there.
that's who that is. Yeah,
And David.
and me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to recap this. It's on your book, which is available everywhere. Native Miami. His family settled there in the 20s and 30s. His father was the city's first anesthesiologist. Graduated from Emory, worked at UPI, and became the first vice president of public relations at Sea Pines on the PR firm. You spent 2 years in Washington, and then you served under Sergeant Shriver and Leroy Collins, and you opened again your first PR firm in the mid '60s. You've had quite the storied career.
Right.
It's amazing, and every time we talk, and you remind me about that you worked with Leroy Collins and you worked in the Peace Corps, it really says something about where you are in your heart, all right? And to be able to do that. And so many of the good things that are happening in the country is because of leaders like yourself and people that you worked with to make this all better.
Oh, thank you.
So, my pleasure as always. So here we are. We're all both over the age of 60, wondering what the next few years looks like. So tell us what's on your schedule, David.
Well, after I wrote that book, I liked the fact that I could write a book and publish it, and so I wrote another book. I wrote a novel that was loosely based on my early life. I played piano and sang when I was growing up. Played in some of the hotels on Miami Beach when I was in high school, and so I wrote a novel about that. And so I like writing. So recently I've been writing short stories, and that's probably what I'll be doing for the rest of as long as I've got.
And does anybody that's in our studio audience ever have any input in any of that?
Anybody where?
In our studio audience.
Well, yeah, it's a little fellow sitting right over here.
Does he ever have any input?
Absolutely does.
Good. You get finally you got to moving on up. All right.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're writing short stories, all right?
Yeah.
And that you have 2 books. People can go on everywhere and find those. And there's for people over the age of 50, when you look in here and you see these pictures and you see the people that are involved with this, all right? And I look at these, I recognize these people. I know these names. George Smathers that's in there, Leroy Collins, all right? Bill Moyer, Sergeant Shriver. And you. Oh my goodness. There you are right there. So lots of neat stuff that's happening.
By the way, you could get these books, this one and the other one, at Books and Books.
Right there in Coral Gables.
Mitchell Kaplan's place. Mitchell, are you listening?
And certainly there's a trendsetter that was able to figure out how to do more than just sell books, because he created a whole culture there.
Oh, Mitchell, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's the tribute to him and his fine efforts is coming up, I think, or maybe it was last weekend, the book fair that was downtown.
Right.
And
right.
So it is always a pleasure being with you, David.
Well,
right? I think of our years in the same community fondly, all right? And I hope that we can continue doing this.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. David Pearson, folks, you can find him all over the internet. And you can find his book, JFK and Bobby, Arnie and Jack and David. Folks, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time, and happy Thanksgiving.